All right, let's make the first stone. This pattern is called Kiss and Tell. It's a really simple design, and I love how the colors and the pattern work together for this one. The first thing you're going to want to do, if you have not already done so, is paint your background black. So if you need to do that, go ahead and pause the video and then come back here. And then the next thing that you're going to want to do is, if you're using a stencil, go ahead and add your grid lines. I've got mine on here, but as I mentioned in the supply list video, the stencil is optional. The only thing that's super important is that you find your center dot. And so once you have your center dot, everything else will fall into place as we work the design. So just make sure you have a center dot. I've got my paint colors here. Again, same as in the supply list. I've got a light and dark purple, a light and dark teal, and a metallic gold. I've got my dotting tool set here, and I am ready to go. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is we're going to make our center dot. Now I'm going to make that dot with my 12mm tool. But before I do that, I'm going to add in a dot with my 6mm tool, because it's much easier to make a smaller dot in the right place than a larger dot. So I'm going to go ahead and make a dot in the center. And then I'm going to come back with my 12mm tool and expand that dot. So now I have a big, bright visual of where I need to go. So I'm going to go ahead and expand that up to 12mm. What I like to do with the larger dots is, once I get the paint on there, I'll come back through with the smaller tool and just make sure my dot is perfectly shaped and the paint is spread out evenly. Now, when we're talking about making a dot, if this is your first time, when you use the rod styluses or the rods, what you're going to do when you dip them in paint is you want to dip them in so that the paint comes up over the edge. You want plenty of paint on that tool. Your paint should be thin enough that it moves as you rotate the rod, but not so thin that it will drip on you, okay? And then what you want to do when you make your dot is you are just going to gently give that tool a little kiss so that the paint squishes. See that little squish? That's what we're going for. What I don't like to see is stamping. We're not stamping, okay? See how it, like, I mean, this is different because it's on my hand, but it will change the shape of the circle if you stamp, and it will also make it harder to make your dots all the same size, and it might give it a funny texture. So no stamping. We just want to kiss our surface just gently enough that we get a nice evenly sized dot each and every time. So once we have our center dot there, what we're going to do is we're going to add a ring of dots around the center dot. And for this, I am going to use my 2.5mm dotting tool, my 2.5mm stylus. So I'm using my larger stylus on the smaller end of the larger stylus. And I'm going to use gold paint. And for this, what I'm going to do is I like to do north, south, east, and west. I like to do my cardinal points first. And this is where I say, if you don't have a stencil, this north, south, and east, and west will help you find visually where you need to go. So once you get those 4 dots, then you can add one in between. You kind of cut that space in half. So you start with 4, add 4 more, and you'll end up with 8. And you'll notice as I'm working here, I dip and dot each and every time because I want these all to be the same size, okay? Once I have my 8, I'm going to cut it in half again and add 1 in the middle of each of these spaces, and that will give me 16 total. And that is how you can easily start a pattern without having your stencil. So now I've got 16 evenly spaced dots that I can work out from. All right, next I am going to go up to my 4mm tool. For me, that's a clear rod, and I'm going to use my light purple my Wisteria color, and I'm going to add one dot in between each of these. So I'm going to work this pattern outward, and so I'm going to off center it. So I'm not putting it right next to a dot, I'm putting it in between two dots. And what I like to do is skip a space. So I'm going to make my dot, skip a space, make my dot, skip a space. I'll work all the way around, and that will get me 8 of those, and then I'll go around one more time, and that will get me to 16. I'm going to continue using the same tool, 4mm, and this time I'm going to switch to my brighter purple, my purple Pizazz, and I'm going to again add one dot in between. So this falls back on the lines. If you're using a stencil, we're back on the lines, and I'm going to add one dot in between. So just like that. Again, I'm going to put one in there, skip a spot, add another one, skip a spot, add another one, and I'm going to go all the way around. That will get us 8. Once I have my 8, I'm going to go back through and add one in between, and that'll get us 16 total. Next, I'm going to switch to my stylus, and I'm going to use my 1.5mm end and some gold paint. And this time what we're going to do is we're going to double dot. And so for this, I'm going to dip in gold. I'm going to come right next to these in the space, and I'm going to do 1 dot, 2 dots. Then redip and come back. 1 dot, 2 dots. And I'm going to do this all the way around. And that fills up some of those spaces in between those beautiful bright purple dots that we just made. for the next step, we are going to use our 6mm tool and our light teal paint. And we are going to make one dot. We're going to work in between the purple dots, right next to that gold set of dots there. So I'm going to line up with my gold set and add one teal dot in each of those spaces all the way around. So again, 16 of those. Now that we've got those dots in there, we're going to start adding some details. I am going to use my 1.5mm tool and my dark teal paint. And on every other dot, it doesn't matter where you start, just choose one. I'm going to add a center dot. Remember, every other. So I'm going to add one, skip one, add a dot, skip one, add a dot, skip one, all the way around. So we are adding 8 dots total. And those are going to be our center dots. And then what we're going to do is walk the dots on each side. So when we walk the dots, I'm going to switch to the smaller end, which is my 1mm. So my center dot was 1.5. So I'm going to switch to 1mm, still using my teal paint. So dip into my teal paint, sorry about that. And then we're going to walk the dots on each side. So when we walk the dots, we dip and then count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I can fit 6 comfortably. So I'm going to do stitch 6 on each side. Now, if you can fit more, that's great. If you can fit less, that's okay too. Just be consistent on how many you place. So dip in the paint, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so for every dot that has a center dot there, I'm going to do this on each side. Take your time with this step. If you need to pause and really take time for your spacing as you walk the dots, go ahead and do that. I'm going to continue using the same size tool, and what we're going to do is on the dots that we did not add this design around, we are going to add a little embellishment. And for this, I'm going to use my 1mm tool, teal paint. I'm going to dip into the paint, and then what I'm going to do is visually I want it to start just a little farther out. If we envision a circle connecting these two dots, I'm going to go just a little farther out from that. And I'm going to place my tool on my stone just like a pencil and pull a line inward. And then when I reach the dot, just lift it up. Once you complete that design set, I'm going to switch to my 1.5mm side, and I'm going to add 2 dots. One on the right side of the little design that I made and one on the left, and that completes kind of that little design set there. So we're going to dip and dot 1mm on the right side, 1mm on the left. Then I'm going to switch to my 8mm dotting tool, and I'm going to use my light purple paint, and I'm going to add 16 8mm dots. And so it's basically one next to each one of these that we have in this circle here. So you can use that previous line of dots to help with your placement. So now I have 16 of those light purple dots. I am going to switch to my 2.5mm tool. So for me, that's my green stylus on the small end. And I'm going to walk the dots around half of these. So first, I'm going to start by putting my center dot, which is 2.5mm. I'm going to find the dots that are next to the little flourish that we made. And that's where I'm going to place one purple center dot. Once I have that center dot, I'm going to switch to my 1.5mm, and I'm going to walk the dots on each side. So again, I dip and then count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I can fit 6 comfortably, so I'm going to add 6 on each side. So we end up with 8 of those, and then I'm going to repeat the same process with gold paint on the ones that we skipped. So I'm going to go back to my 2.5mm tool and add my center dots. And then switch to my 1.5mm tool, and I'm going to add 6 dots on each side. Now I've gone all the way around with that. I do want to point something out to you. So on my very first set here, you'll see I kind of pulled that paint just a little bit. So sometimes metallic paint can be a little unfriendly, and if that happens, it's a little thicker sometimes than regular acrylic. What I'll do is I'll let that dry, and I'll just use my tiniest little tip and some black paint to clean that up. So I'm not going to mess with that while it's wet. So just know that if that happens, you're not the only one that happens to, and sometimes you just have to wait till you're finished and do a little cleanup. All right, so I've added my petals. When you walk the dots around a circle, you turn them into what we call petals. I've added those all the way around, and I'm going to go back to my 3mm tool and my gold paint, and in between each one of these, I am going to go and add a 3mm dot. So now that I've got those petals, in between each petal, I just add a gold dot. You'll do that all the way around, so you'll end up with 16 of those. Then what we're going to do is add another layer onto these petals. So where I have my purple, I'm going to walk the dots in gold, and where I have the gold, I'm going to walk the dots in purple. So I'm going to pick the purple to start with, which means I'm going to put gold next to it. And I'm going to go around with my 3mm tool, 3mm, and add a gold center dot on each petal with purple. Then I'm going to switch to my 1.5mm tool and walk the dots. And because I'm adding a new petal or a new layer on this petal, I'm going to count again and see what fits comfortably. So I'm going to dip, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to stop at, I'm going to stop at 4 because that's where the other side is going to come in. So I can fit 4 comfortably. So 4 goes on each side. And then of course, once you have those all the way around, we're going to do the purple on the ones that we skipped. So I'm going to go back to my 3mm tool and my bright purple and add my center dot. And then switch back to my 1.5mm and walk the dots on each side. Trying to fit 4 in there as we did with the gold. right, we finished all those pretty petals all the way around. And now we're gonna add in another kind of flourish design in between each petal. And for this, I'm gonna use my 1.5mm tool. I'm gonna start with teal paint. So I'm gonna dip my tool into the paint. And what we're gonna do is in each little dip in between the petal, I'm gonna dip into paint, I'm gonna add a little dot and walk that inwards. Add a little dot and walk that inwards. So 2 lines in between each petal. And all I do for this is I'm dipping in my paint, I'm tapping it on the stone, and I'm drawing just like I would if I was holding a pencil. Once you've made it all the way around, we're going to do the same thing again, but we're going to move to the lighter teal paint. So 1.5mm light teal paint. I'm just going to go just beyond the line that we just made and then inwards. So we're kind of layering this design. And then the last part of this little flourish that we're going to do is with gold. And I'm going to use the same tool, 1.5 millimeters. I'm going to dip into that gold paint and I'm going to draw a line right down the middle. Now this design has one more layer, and what we're going to do is repeat this flourish again, but we're going to do it with the purple this time. And so I'm going to switch to, or continue using my 1.5 millimeter tool, but I'm going to switch to the light purple paint. And I am going to do the same thing. Now the shape might be a little different since we're working in between an already existing flourish shape. But I am going to add that line on each side. Once we finish with that light purple, we're going to come back through with the purple Pizazz and do the same thing. So I'm just going to add another layer. And then of course to finish it off, we switch to gold and add the line in the middle. Now, depending on where you are as far as your edges and how much room you have, you can choose to continue with more of a design if you'd like to. This is where I'm going to stop. I feel like this covers the top of my stone pretty well. And so this is the base of my design. And now what we're going to do is just add another layer to bring this to life. And there are two ways that I'm going to do that. The first way is by adding some rhinestones. Now, if you're not a sparkle person, that is absolutely fine. You don't have to do this step. You can skip the rhinestones. But as you can see here, I've got some smaller stones. These are size 12, and some larger stones. These are size 20. And what I'm going to do is just get some craft glue and put that right on my palette here. And I typically will use one of my dotting tools to add dots of glue, just like I would dots of paint. And so the first place that I'm going to add stones is around this light purple circle right here close to the center. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip and dot. And I'm going to do half of this first and then come back and do the other half. That way my glue doesn't dry. But I'm going to add 8 dots of glue. And then I can pick up these little rhinestones, maybe, with my stylus and place them into place. And I just have the tiniest bit of glue on the end of the tool to help me pick that up. And so I can place that on there. And so I'm going to add 16 of those in that area. So I love how the rhinestones add just a little bit of sparkle in all the right places. Then the next place that I'm going to add rhinestones, oops, be careful not to put your fingers in wet paint, as I have just done. Remember, your paint is still wet. Okay, fix that, thank goodness. I'm going to add another row of my larger rhinestones right here where the light purple is again. And so I'm going to, since these are a little larger, I'm going to add a larger dot of glue. My second row of rhinestones, and I really like that. And then the last thing here that we're going to do is add top dots. And these top dots, in order to do them, your first layer needs to be fairly dry. So make sure where you're going to dot these is dry. If you did not use rhinestones, it is an option to add top dots in the 2 rows that I added rhinestones. So that's why I say they're optional. You don't have to add the glitz and the sparkle if that's not your thing. But I'm going to add top dots, and when you add top dots, what you want to do is pick a different color and pick a smaller size. And so my first set of top dots is going to go right here in the light teal. I'm going to use a 3mm tool, and I'm going to use my dark teal paint, and I'm going to add a dot in the center, 3mm of each of those light teals. So I'm adding the darker teal in the center. And top dots are optional. You can totally change them. You don't have to use the same colors. You don't have to put them in the same places. When I teach a class, this is kind of where I say this is your opportunity to make the design your own. Add your own top dots wherever you feel like they should go. And then on these deeper color purple dots, I'm going to switch to my 2.5mm, and I'm going to use the light purple and add a light purple dot. And there you have it. We are finished. So what I recommend doing is letting this dry completely. And then if it's something where you're going to have this sitting out somewhere, it's going to get moved or touched, I would definitely recommend putting a gloss glaze or a matte glaze varnish over the top to protect it. But before you do that, you want to make sure this is completely dry. So go ahead and let this dry. I would recommend 24 hours, and then you can go back and put a clear coat varnish. And I hope that you'll share with me, and I will see you in the next workshop. Thanks, everyone.